Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started, so if you could go and take your seats, and we'll start. This is the Indigenous Peoples' History, Health, Relevance to Homelands, Treaties, and Tribal Sovereignty. The Indian nations had always been considered as distinct, independent political communities, retaining their original natural rights as undisputed possessors of the soil from time immemorial. This is a Supreme Court ruling that is known as part of the Marshall Trilogy that was decided in 1832. Today we're asking our panelists a question that will take them in many different directions. So the question is, what does this understanding from the Supreme Court ruling mean in context of health, healing, and restoration of Indigenous people today? Today we have, and I'm very honored to introduce our panel members. We have Councilman Andy Joseph from the Colville Confederated Tribes. And if you've been here, yes, you can. Thank you so much for joining us again. Councilman Joseph was here all day with us yesterday, and the Wenatchee area is part of the traditional territory of Colville tribes. And Andy Joseph opened up our meeting yesterday. We also have Vicki Lowe, who is the executive director of the American Indian Health Commission, and Jamestown S'Klallam, tribal member, and Bella Coola descendant. And we have Toni Lodge, who's joining us by Zoom. Hello there, Toni. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being with her. And Toni is certainly one of the local Native women heroes and grandmas in Spokane County, and everyone knows who Toni is there. So anyway, we are so pleased to have Toni be able to join us. We wanted her in person. We struggled with that. But anyway, she's here with us, and we're so happy. So I am going to ask Andy Joseph if he would like to respond to that question first.
Can you hear me? Okay, on that, court decision, it was, I would say our chiefs that were here way before I ever was. I actually have hereditary blood to Chief Moses Kamayakin and Auhai, and they're from this area. Kamayakin was Palouse, and Chief Moses was chief of the Moses Columbia, and Auhai was a chief of the Yakima Nation. Kamayakin was the head signer of the Treaty of 1855, and they, he didn't really want to sign a treaty. He was actually not feeling like really doing that. But the Yakimas named him the head chief to sign, so he agreed if they would set aside land just west of here at the icicle fishery for the Wenatchee. We call them Piscoyus and Piscotia and the Methow people. So they wrote that in the treaty, and then he signed it and left. But I'd say he's my great grandfather that never actually lived on the Yakima Reservation. Once it was established, most of his family actually reside on Colville. So based on that decision, what our chiefs signed in agreements. Moses signed for a reservation that was actually northwest of here, from the Methow to the crest of the Cascades, clear up to the Canadian border. It's bordered on the east side by the Okanagan River and the Columbia, and then the Colville Reservation is from the east side of the Columbia River, and it follows that river boundary from the middle all the way up to the Canadian border, and the Okanagan River on the west side of the river. So the Okanagan River is actually part of the Colville Reservation, and so the agreements that our chiefs sign are basically acknowledged by that court decision.
Thank you, Andy. Are we? Yeah. So we're putting this map up. Maybe we can show the territory of the traditional territory of the Colville tribes. Can you adjust it? Yeah. Yeah. Or
It actually ranges north of the Canadian border. Also, our tribe actually won hunting rights in Canada near the Snipes Confederacy, and that was won through the Supreme Court just a little over a couple years ago. So we're recognized in Canada as well. The border crossed us, we never crossed it. It was something that, our tribe really believes in our rights to our traditional homelands.
we're going to do this in rounds, so just to let you know that we're going to come back to Andy. But right now we'd like to go to Toni Lodge. Hello again.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I deeply apologize for the open mic that we had. It was not me, it was my staff talking about mansplaining. So just so you know what goes on at the Native Project on a daily basis. I'm the CEO of the Native Project. It's an urban Indian NAIC who is also funded by HRSA as a 336 community health clinic, and we are a licensed substance abuse, mental health, prevention, and child welfare, child serving agency. I'm a citizen of the Turtle Mountain Chippewa tribe of North Dakota. As Jenny Slagle said this morning, it's one of the 300 tribal people that live here in Spokane County, which is the 8th largest urban Indian community in the United States. And I believe King County is the 3rd largest Native community in the United States. In the last 10 years, this U.S. Census shows that 10,000 more people have moved here to Spokane. So I don't know what's up with that. I don't know if they don't know that there's no housing here, but people are moving here. And part of it is as a result of all of this Indian policy that we have been the recipients of since 1492. In 1503, the first official Native policy was delivered to us, and that was by Pope Leo in Italy. Christopher C. had given him a report about, or he had heard about what he saw on his travels, and Pope Leo pondered this, and he said, I'm not sure about the indigenous people. I think they might have souls, but I'm not sure. So we better baptize them anyway. So that was actually the roots of the doctrine of discovery, which one of your other panelists talked about this morning, which really is the blueprint for the taking and the killing and the trafficking and all of the things that have happened to us. What did Jenny call it? The negative narrative since 1492. Anyway, I just really talking about this and talking about sovereignty. I really want to make a point for public health officials and government officials and people who work in this realm. Which is the English's contribution to civilization. You know, the first treaties in England were the basis of the rule of law. And, you know, since Pope Leo gave this doctrine about, you know, you better kill us because we're soulless, but, you know, we might be good slaves. He didn't know. You know, we had to organize in a way that as we went to the schools, whether they were the church schools or the English schools, whatever, we learned about the rule of law ourselves. And in fact, Benjamin Franklin lived with the Iroquois Confederacy, visited them, didn't live there, he visited with them, and came away with a draft of the U.S. Constitution based on the Iroquois Confederacy white writs of peace and their coalition of how many bands and tribes live together. So again, we made a great contribution to the Constitution, and we take it real seriously because it did have roots in our community and our tradition. Anyway, one thing about the rule of law in the United States, as it's expressed in the Constitution, is, you know, treaties are the highest law of the land. And if you don't believe me, read it. I carry a little Constitution, U.S. Constitution book. I don't carry it. It's in my desk drawer because we need to remind ourselves that we take our citizenship as seriously as any of us in this room take our U.S. citizenship. Andy, Jan, me, we take our citizenship so seriously. And so one of the things that's happened because of these numerous court rulings, and I used to be a newspaper reporter back in the 70s, and I got to be present at the birth of a lot of federal Indian law, you know, the Indian Child Welfare Act, the Self-Determination Act, the Indian Religious Freedom Act, things that were not present. We're always present on this ground, but not present in law. Anyway, one of the things about what happened after all of this rush of federal law that were held continuously by the courts up to the Supreme Court, and right now we're actually waiting for a federal court review of the Indian Welfare Act, if you can believe it, after all we've seen at the residential schools and the stories about the children who were taken from us and the children who died in those schools, the children that were buried in those schools and those churches. We are really reviewing whether the Indian Child Welfare Act is valid and if Indian children should not remain with their families and tribes. But anyway, for a ruling, as Jan read, it says the trust responsibility to Native people remains the same, remains as written in all 574 treaties. And I think you as public health providers, again, you know, we talk about sovereignty and government to government. And so the state often contacts the tribes and works with the councils like Andy's on, but forgets the second part of the law. And the second part of the law is the trust responsibility to the individual Native citizen. A good example was, and so you as public health providers and government officials are part of that. You, Native people, are responsible for that trust responsibility for people like us, no matter what our zip code is. We have a good example, and I want Vicki to talk because both Andy and Vicki are my my heroes, and as well as Jan and the work they do, to undo the genocide, which is what our resistance has been since the landing of Christopher C. and the edicts of Pope Leo and the doctrine of discovery that said anything you find is yours, not theirs. That's essentially what it is. It's a license to steal and kill. You know, what Vicki did and the American Indian Health Commission did during the COVID pandemic was said our trust responsibility to our communities is we got to do what we got to do to undo the genocide and keep us alive. But we went from 10 million people to 1 million people since 1492. And we've had many pandemics, not our first rodeo. But anyway, we as a community, a Native community, talked at the American Indian Health Commission and with each other and said, you know, we get the Department of Health has their priorities, the CDC, the federal government, but our trust responsibility is to make sure that we make sure in our own communities and families that we stay alive. Priority population list of how we're going to vaccinate people. And it was, and I can't even tell you, I'm old and I'm at my end of my shelf life professionally. And COVID is my most, I am the most proud of, because I know we undid the genocide. I know we saved lives, and it was because of the public policy and the support of the Supreme Court ruling that said we get to do the trust responsibility to Native people. And so Vicki and Lou Schmidt and the rest of the commission negotiated that we got to do our own life saving in our own communities. And again, that's what the Supreme Court ruling says to me, that it is sovereignty for nations, but it's even more important, it's trust responsibility to individual Native people like me and anybody else in this room and my grandchildren. That's the most important to me, that we will live on. Didn't have a soul, and everything that we had was for the taking.
Thank you, Toni. We're going to come back to you too. So, okay, Vicki. And we're also, are we putting the map up? Did we get it up? Ah.
Hello? Okay. Sorry. I squatchy siam Nistaicha Vicki Lowe since nas to Tiflam Nusklayam since na Nuhak. Good afternoon, my honored friends. My name is Vicki Lowe. I am Jamestown Squalam and Bellacoola First Nations from Canada. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of my Jamestown Squalam ancestors because it is a little bit unique, but it is about land. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about my great-grandma from Bella Bella. She was a medicine woman, and she made medicine. She came down to the United States. There's a little discrepancy in time. We think she was maybe in a boarding school and showed up in Jamestown pregnant with my great-uncle Frank when she was 17, but she met my great-grandpa. But she made medicine that she had learned as traditional, but it was illegal because our ways were considered religion when it was culture, and the United States government had made that illegal. And she made medicine her entire life illegally in the United States because the Religious Freedoms Act didn't pass until 1978, and she had already passed away. And because of assimilation, she didn't pass on that knowledge to us. And Pam, I really appreciate your story about your great-grandma, because our great-grandmas were a lot alike. But Pam got to learn about their family's medicine, and we didn't. And so our family has always been involved in healthcare. So I think we tried to carry on that tradition without even knowing. But the story of the Jamestown Squalam tribe is that our leaders had to sign a treaty, and they didn't want to, and we didn't want to leave our land. They just, the land is so much a part of our community. I think, our understanding, our ancestors' understanding of land is that it's part of the community. It's not something you own. We took care of it. It took care of us. we took care of the fish and the trees and the birds and the people. And so having it taken away and being told basically to go live on the Skokomish Reservation, which was a tribe we didn't necessarily get along with, was not very, not what we wanted to happen. So the federal government came to the village in Port Townsend, that's now Port Townsend, called Kaitai, and burned down the homes of the Sklalams and took our canoes and tied them together and took them down to Skokomish and forced the people there. But because our land and our connection to it meant so much, and I think our timing was later in the treaties, our people snuck back in their canoes one at a time during the night, and then we came back and pulled together the money that the federal government had given us for buying the land from us and bought back some of our land and moved back down to the beach where our families continue to live. And so that connection to land just has always been so important. But, the treaties that were an effort to break that connection to the land because that's our community and our culture, and it was a part of the genocide and moving people to urban areas without that connection. So as we've moved through time, and Toni mentioned the Indian Self-Determination Act, and that it was really important. It allows tribes as governments to take over the funding for their programs from the federal government. And in 1995, the Jamestown Sklallam tribe did that with their health funds, and we started a program. And from that, we now have a clinic in the community of Sequim that serves over 17,000 patients. So we consider our community everybody. So we serve the non-natives and natives. We have our tribal members have access to choose from up to 20 different primary care doctors. We just opened a mat clinic. So that sovereignty was important for us to leverage our ability to provide health care and to help our whole community. I'll stop there.
Okay, so there's a map up on the screen now that you'll see. And on this map, I can't really see it so well from here. So it has the original names of the indigenous people that populated the area. This was 1492, so prior to Europeans coming to the Americas. And it looks like this is also including Canada. Am I right, Cindy? Yeah. And some of Mexico? And there aren't borders, right? Andy described borders, there aren't borders. And so I don't know, what are your comments about this map? And so that would be one question, because I know Vicki and Andy and Toni all I have heard you express some of this before, so I'd love to hear you share that with the audience. But also, in respect to relationship to the plants and the animals, and also having to do with the access to traditional medicines. Andy, would you like to?
Okay. A little more history about myself. I'm what you call a relocation baby. They had the government had what they called the Relocation Act, and around the same time they had termination of a lot of tribes, and so if they could get our people away from the reservation and try to assimilate us more, they also did that by the boarding schools. I was a boarding school student of St. Mary's Mission Catholic School, and a lot of my friends were severely abused there. I remember getting whipped by the priests, and anyway, I was lucky. I was was not sexually abused like some of my classmates, but being relocated, my dad relocated to Portland and went to Multnomah College there. And we ended up in Bremerton after I was born, and then later on a millwright job opened up at Port Gamble, Washington, and so I got to be raised close to my wife's tribe is at Port Gamble, Sklalams. Then in 1968 we moved home, and my grandma Lucy Covington was moving to protect our reservation from being sold out from underneath us. That's where my political upbringing started, and also when my spiritual training really started. Our world was probably the closest thing to heaven pre-contact. We had everything that was needed to keep our tribes healthy, and we measured our wealth by what we could give, not what we could take, and so everything had a ceremony. Every season, there was prayer and ceremony. Every person had a special reason for being. We had people that were doctors, people that knew the different medicinal plants for medicines. In our language, they would call them Sukh Marim, and that means like a doctor of medicine. Tlaquilk, that's more of a spiritual type of a doctor that helps with your spirituality. And we had hunters, we had fishermen, we had food gatherers, we had the people that were warriors, or for protection. Not all tribes got along with each other back in the day, so in order to protect our food places, we had to have warriors. So myself, I'm a veteran. My two brothers and one of my sisters is a veteran. My dad served as well, and three brother-in-laws and father-in-law. So it runs in our family. Actually, it runs in a lot of our blood to be able to protect our people. Like I said the other day, my elder told me there's an answer for every question and a cure for every sickness, but it's up to you to find out what that is. Pre-contact, it was family's duty to send their young people to go pack the water, and they would either do this before sunrise or after the sunset, hoping that the young child would seek a visitor, a spiritual visitor, and then in that they would receive their kind of what their duty is, and the elders, the kids would come home, mommy, daddy, I seen this animal and it was singing a song, and they would tell them, oh no, that couldn't have happened, but in reality they knew something happened. So they would seek a elder to start guiding that person, that young child, as they grow up, so that they could be careful and be able to take care of themselves, because that meant they was going to play a big role in their tribe, to either be one, the provider or medicine person or the warrior that they're going to need to protect their tribe. So, but there's good and evil in everything, and so for a lot of our younger generations today, our youth, they're like targets for peer pressure. The demons that are out there are people that are controlled by, I call them the evil one. They'll go after our kids so that they won't be able to use the gifts that were given to them. Anyway, that is why we need, more of our people actually getting trained. This modern world we live in, these things here, you see kids playing their games all the time, or their, school and academic sports, things like that draw them away from their traditional upbringing. Sometimes, cause, them to, I always could kind of compare it to Star Wars. Luke was being brought up by Ben Kenobi to become this powerful Jedi Knight, and then the dark side got a hold of him. So I tell this to my grandsons and my sons, don't fall to the dark side, as those demons are after you, trying to draw you away from what you need to do in this world. But prior to contact, our people had the best foods, the best nourishment that a body could take, and I spoke about my great-great-granddaughter that lived to be 118 and could climb on a horse while she was in her 90s. That was because her mother worked for all her food. It was all natural. The salmon provided the oils that lubricate the joints, and the physical activity of digging roots and picking berries and working hides to make clothing. It was all physical labor. So as she's developing in the mother's womb, she had all of that. And then as she grew herself to be that age, I would say that, because of contact or diet, and because of the going to boarding schools and the 4 food groups that we were taught in school weren't made for our people. They caused us more pain and sicknesses, so we're more susceptible to illnesses like diabetes and heart disease and arthritis, and because it's not in our everyday diet, the foods that were made for our bodies. A lot of the lands that we gave up to move to where we're at had those special roots and berries that grow, and then they put the dams in and block the salmon from a lot of our people. I have to travel over an hour to go fish, and my wife couldn't believe how much I craved salmon, but it's something that's really hereditarily in my system. So I guess might kind of answer your
That
question.
notes the salmon, that why you really love salmon soup, why that shows up everywhere. If you Google Andy, it says he loves salmon soup. Toni?
I know, I don't remember what the question was, and I wasn't there in 1832, despite what my grandkids think. So I don't know what. I just want to say, in Spokane, this summer we had a whole bunch of white nationalists arrested over in Coeur d'Alene. They were going to disrupt the 4th of July and the Pride celebrations, but one of the guys that was arrested, you know, proudly showed on TV a T-shirt that said, "Conquered, not stolen," and it was a picture of the United States. And I thought, you wish, but I thought, you are a recipient of the public school education of America that tells us this narrative that we were manifest destiny, we were conquered, you know, we gave it all up, we signed treaties, and instead of telling the truth, the whole story, that it's not over yet. You know, Charlemagne made sure in the rule of law in England that treaties are rarely abrogated. It's not over. Those treaties still exist. You are everywhere you walk today, this week, this month, this year, is Indian, is Native country. And like Andy said, a lot of it, and Vicki, it's not all bought and paid for. It's not all, I don't know, did I do something wrong? Those kids are passing their phone around. No. But it's still in the process of making some payments. We're still in the process of making some agreements. You know, my tribe has not settled its 10-cent treaty settlement. We sold millions of acres of land in North Dakota and Montana for 10 cents an acre when the non-natives got paid almost $2 an acre. And when you multiply that by millions of acres, we are still owed a lot of rent on our lease, which is called a treaty. So again, it's not over. It's still, our treaties are still in effect, our sovereignty as tribes, but we as the workers, again, have that right and that responsibility to follow through with the treaty obligations ourselves and do that trust responsibility, plan really good programs for people. And I do want to acknowledge my board member, Helene Dewey, who's in the audience, and just thank her for representing us today when I couldn't be there. So, and her department too. So, all I got. I do want to say one thing, Jan, if you, what Andy said about, we're trying to change in our clinic that the first question a provider asks the patient is, what are you eating? Not what's wrong with you. And really change the public health conversation around that.
So Toni, could you share a little bit more about how you came to making that shift? Why?
Well, Congress funded the special diabetes program for Indians, and for the first time since 1492, at the end of the first 20 years of that funding, we saw life expectancy for Native people had increased for the first time in 500 years. Unfortunately, during COVID, apparently we have lost 6 years of longevity in our life. We've lost the most life expectancy of any ethnic group in the United States. Again, what did Jenny call it? A negative narrative, but it's true. So we made all these gains. We worked on our substance use. We worked on our diabetes. And now with COVID, we're back to the basics. We have to, what is the basics? Basics are what we eat. And we did learn that again from the diabetes program. So this summer with our youth program, what did we do? We got the state tribal public health funding, thanks to the Department of Health and Vicki, the American Indian Health Commission, the legislature. What did we do with our little kids? We have K through 8th grade. We built gardens. We built little box gardens that they got to take home, and we taught them where food comes from. And they didn't know a lot of these are urban kids. They didn't know. And they're like, well, we live in an apartment. I'm like, you can grow things in a little apartment. But I mean, just really getting the word out. We got to change how we think about food and not go to McDonald's. And, you know, let's grow lettuce and let's make sandwiches and salads for lunch. And so we just really change everything up, and hopefully we'll change our providers. Oh yeah, there's a, change our providers and thinking different about our community and where we live and how we get our food, because it's not like we used to get. We're buffalo hunter tribe. We don't get buffalo anymore unless you go to Yellowstone Park, and you can't get close to them. We don't want those ones. So anyway, I got.
Thank you, Toni.
Yes. And, you know, just a side note, if anybody ever asks you about treaties, in 1871, the federal government decided not to negotiate any more treaties, and so they passed 25 USC 71. Yes, I'm quoting laws. And you should look it up, because it talks about how even though the federal government was not going to make any more treaties, that did not negate any of the promises that had been made in the treaties that had been signed. Just a little FYI. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things, sorry, but first thing I want to talk about is evidence-based practice. Boo. So some of the words I don't like the most. In our culture, it's been practice-based evidence, and that's, you know, the teachings that Councilman Joseph had, the teachings that Pam's great-grandma, the teachings I wish I could have gotten from my great-grandma, is that we know it works, so we don't have to study it and prove it works, right? And so those traditions in medicine, again, were illegal. And so we've come a full circle from that time. I think it was 1886 when the federal government passed the law that didn't allow tribes to practice their 1883, sorry. To practice their ceremonies and to practice medicine. And we've come around now where I think that, I always struggle with the right word, dominant culture, Western European culture, you know, is starting to realize that our ways were really the right way. That, you know, that what ails us could be found in the land, but the land and the trees and the birds and the fish, they do still have to be healthy. And so what does that mean today? That means that there's a move towards tribal food sovereignty. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's an important part of that, and that is reclaiming the food part of our culture by making sure that the land is healthy, that we can go gather in the places that our ancestors gathered. So there's work going on, the work that Toni's doing with her youth. When she told me about that project, I was so excited, because I think it's so important, especially for urban kids who maybe, you know, like kids not knowing that milk comes from cows, like my grandkids. They saw a chicken in a yard, were laying eggs, and they thought it was a farm. Oh, we gotta wrap it up, Jeff? Is that what that means? Okay, sorry. Anyways, so that work is really important, but it is, it's not just about food, it's about the system, and it's about the land and taking care of the land. So I think I'll just stop there.
Thank you. It's about the land and taking care of the land. That sounds like a really good place to end, actually, and begin, because we know that we're not finished here. We're just setting a path for our next phase. And so thank you so much, Andy, Joseph again, and Toni Lodge, thank you so much. And Vicki, and I have a little something for each of you. Toni, we're going to have to... I think I'm going to have to make a trip out and bring it to you.
Uh,
Yours is like this. Can you see it? Right there?
You know, as I got older, when I went into the armed forces, my brother-in-law brought me home one weekend, and I remember waking up at his house the next morning and seeing a young lady looking at me, and next thing you know, we've been married a little over 40 years. So, but she's actually Port Gamble Sklallam, and I knew more of her people because she was raised in the city of Tacoma all her life, and her mother was Jamestown Sklallam. So when I go to the dinners in their tribal communities, they say, "You sure you're not coastal?" But I was raised, with the Port Gamble Sklallam, and where they had the clam bakes, and I always craved that food too. So it's just wanted to say I might be by one of my in-laws here. We never know.
Thank you again very much.